We have seen that the warehouses are one of the most important concepts in Snowflake because they provide us with the compute capacity to execute the workload. So for example, our queries. And therefore in this lecture, we want to have a closer look at those warehouses in practice. So we want to see how we can set up a new warehouse and how we can manage them. So there are two ways of doing this. The first one is using this interface, and the second one is using SQL commands in our worksheets. So therefore, let's have a look at, in this lecture, at the option number 1 to create a warehouse in the interface. First of all, I want to say that we need to have the role of account admin or security admin to be able to see the existing warehouse that is available per default. So if I go into the admin section and there under warehouses, I can see this warehouse, and the owner of this is the account admin. So this is just available per default, and therefore if I switch to the role of, for example, public, I won't be able to see any warehouse. So we talk about the roles in a little bit more detail later on, but for now I just quickly wanted to mention this, that we have to have the right role selected. So you can see that the role public can actually not even create warehouses. However, we have the role sysadmin, which can actually create warehouses. Also, the user admin can not create warehouses as well, but the sysadmin is actually able to do that. So sysadmin is able to do that, and the security admin, which is basically the second most powerful after the account admin, this can also see this warehouse, but you can see that this one cannot create new warehouses. So we talk about those roles in a bit more detail later on. For now, just for the sake of simplicity, we can either take the account admin or the sysadmin. So the sysadmin is usually the role that is managing the warehouses, but in the beginning, to set up the account, it is also possible to use the account admin. In our case, it doesn't really make a big difference, but we will use the sysadmin, so this is more in alignment with the best practices. All right, so we have the warehouses, and now when we want to set up a new warehouse, we can just click on this button plus warehouse. So first of all, we give it a name. We can say this is our first warehouse. And afterwards, we could also add a comment just to make it a bit more descriptive. And for the size, we can choose again extra small because we won't have very complicated queries in the beginning. So this is more cost saving because you can see that in this case, the number of servers that are used is doubling with each increase of the size. So you see, we also use the double amount of credits. So here with small, we have 2 credits per hour. And now we are paying for those credits based on a few things. So the first important thing is that mostly this is based on the edition that we are using. So in our case, we are using probably the Enterprise Edition if you have selected the same as I have done. So in this case, you also have this one selected. And in here, we have, depending on the platform that we are using and also the region, some smaller differences as well. So for example, let's say I'm choosing maybe EU, and then here in this case, it is maybe a bit more expensive. And maybe if I choose Microsoft Azure, for example, there can be also some additional differences. So here it is depending on which platform and region we have selected, but mostly it depends on the edition. So we can see in this case $3 per credit per hour, or like $3 per credit. And now if we go back to the creation of our warehouse, we also have the advanced options. So here, let's have a look at this to see how the warehouses actually work. So here we see we have these auto resume and auto suspend. And this also shows us already some interesting feature about the warehouses. So we have the option to automatically suspend a warehouse if it is inactive for a specific period. So if we have it selected, for example, to 5 minutes, after it's not been used actually, because we always pay for the activity when it is running, but if it is not used for example, more than 5 minutes, then it will be automatically suspended. So this is very much recommended to save cost and not by accident just have a warehouse running, because then we pay the full price. And additionally, when we have this auto suspend selected, it is also recommended to use auto resume. And yeah, then we automatically, when we start a query again, will use the warehouse and it will be started automatically. So we don't need to manually start it again, because this could cause some issues if, for example, the warehouse is used in a report in another application, and then automatically it will be resumed for us. Afterwards, we can also see this very interesting option of a multi-cluster warehouse. Especially in larger organizations, this is also recommended. So it is good to use this multi-cluster warehouse because this makes it more dynamic. This means based on the workload, we can have a minimum number of clusters and a maximum number of clusters. So when there's, for example, in the afternoon, some peak hours, then additional clusters can be added to our multi-cluster warehouse so that we are more powerful when we need it. And then we can also slow it down and it is getting a little bit cheaper again. So here we have this number of clusters. So for example, we can set it to 3. And then the scaling policy we talk about in a little bit more detail after we have set up the warehouse as well. But just to be very simple, standard is just a little bit more on the side of performance. This means a new cluster will be spinned up a little bit faster. And it is just a little bit more conservative by conserving more credit. So it's a bit more economical, but it may take a little bit more time until an additional cluster is spinned up. So here we are just a little bit more on the side of saving credits, whereas with standard, we are a little bit more on the side of having a bit of a better performance. So we are earlier in spinning up additional clusters. In our case, let's just actually choose standard. This is fine for us. And then we also have this option, query acceleration. Here we have some specific types of queries where we can benefit from that. So if we click here on learn more, we can see that there are specific queries where we can have a much better performance, but then also there are additional costs associated with it. And in our case also, this is too specific. We don't need to have this used because we are just using very basic, and for the most queries we also don't need this option. All right, so now with this setup we can go ahead and create the warehouse. And also additionally, actually, let's quickly mention the difference between standard and Snowpark optimized. So the standard is the one that we use actually just in most cases. So this is just the standard warehouse. We in almost all cases use this standard type. But then we also have the Snowpark optimized warehouse. So here we have a little bit of a different type of warehouse. So it has larger memory and more cache. So if we have very memory intensive operations, it is optimized for this. So this is optimized basically for Snowpark, which can be used for specific types of machine learning workloads, very complex queries. But in most cases, we have the better option with standard. But with these specific machine learning oriented queries that are maybe very complex and memory intensive, we can benefit again from a better performance. But this of course comes then with an additional price. So in our case, we just select standard, we go ahead and create the warehouse, and then we will see in just a second that this warehouse has been created. It is now visible to us. We can see this role is the owner. It is currently started, so per default it is started. We can see it is just started with one cluster. The other ones are inactive, so they are not being used, but there are no queries running and also no queries queued. And we could now go ahead and in our worksheet, so if we go to projects and we would maybe use our first worksheet, for example, we could now select this warehouse. So you can see in this case, no warehouse is selected. Of course, we have to grant now also permissions. So we can see in this case, it is not visible yet. We would have to grant those permissions afterwards. But for example, if I use the role account admin, I can see that this warehouse can be now used for our workload. So I can select it and then we have this setup. All right. So this was the first option. And now in the second option, we want to see how this can be done also using the interface and SQL